Hello, new Electrom owner. Well, congratulations. You've purchased an Electrom, and now it's time to put it together. This video will walk you through the assembly of your bike as it will come out of your shipping crate, and we'll go through all the steps as well as the tools that you will need to assemble your Electrom. I have removed all of the packing plastic that will be wrapped around this bike to hold all of these pieces in place, but everything is laid out as you will find it when it comes out of the crate. So, first of all, I'd like to begin by letting you know I'm wearing my chest harness here with a camera on it so that I can shoot close-ups. So hopefully you won't find this rig too distracting. I know I find it a little bit distracting, but what can you do? So first of all, let's have a look at the tools we're going to need. It's pretty straightforward. To assemble your Electrom fresh out of the box, you need very few tools. You'll need a pair of side cutters to cut the zip ties that will be used to hold the fender in place. You will need metric Allen key multi-tool to assemble some bolts, a 15mm metric wrench, an 11mm wrench, and this is actually to turn a 1/4-inch nut. So you can also use a 1/4-inch wrench in this case. And then we just have a little adjustable crescent wrench for those few awkward spots where we just need a wrench of the right size. So to start out with, let's put the wheel on. And by the way, this is the same procedure you would use to remount the wheel if you had to fix a flat front tire. All right, and I'm going to start up this camera now. So first we'll take the front wheel out of its cradle on the seat. So here's our front wheel. I'll lean that up against here. I'm going to take the tail box off of the bike, and it is flipped around backwards just for shipping space. And I'm going to lay it down this way so that I don't put any weight on the fender. This is the front fender. It's nestled in the tail box. Put the front fender up here. Okay, then we will pull the seat out, and on most of these parts, the hardware needed to mount the component is wrapped up with it. So the bolts needed to hold the seat in place are mounted with the bolts. The axle nuts and torque arrestor retaining bolts are with the wheel. And as well, your bike will be shipped with 4 heavy-duty UV-resistant nylon zip ties that are used to hold the fender on. Now, I know this maybe seems a little hokey to use these things, but they are in fact actually the best tool for the job, so that's why we use them. And these are really high quality, rated to 120 pounds braking strength, and nylon, so they won't break down in the sun. Okay, we've got all of our parts off of the bike, so let's start with some of the basics. First of all, I'm going to swing the fairing up and out of our way, and we'll start out by rocking the footwell forward into its most likely position. And to do this, pull off the top cap. What we're looking for is the 11mm nut in here, and we'll use our 11mm wrench and loosen this nut off. And it's spinning on the other side, so I'm going to use my crescent wrench to hold the nut on the other side. I can just reach in there. Once this is rocked forward, it'll be easier to manage. So this is our adjustment, and what this slider does is it allows us to adjust the height of our cowling by moving the tail box fore and aft. Most people over about 5'6" typically want the footwell all the way forward and the cowling all the way up, and we can fine-tune that later once the bike is on. For now, I'm just going to tighten this down. the pedaling station top cap just mounts with Velcro, and we line up the bolt and nut holes and squeeze everything in. There we go. That's got that done, and that's got our cowling in. Next, I will use the Allen key and a 5mm wrench, and I will realign our handlebars. For your handlebar alignment, you basically want the handlebar to be just slightly tilted forward. So I'm going to tip that. There we go. And you can adjust this. This is in fact set up so that you can rock the handlebars forward and back a little bit depending on your personal preference. But what you do want, though, is you want the handlebars to be equal. So whichever way you have one set up, the other should be set up. So I'm going to line those up. Eyeball from the side. Check the angles. That looks pretty good. There we go. And I'm tightening. There's a top pinch bolt and a bottom pinch bolt on each of these. Tightening both. There. So that's it. Our handlebars are good and our cowling is in place. Bring this down. Okay, now let's mount the front wheel. And the front wheel has a disc brake side and a power cable side. The disc brake side goes on this side here, power cable on the other side. This is the torque arrestor, and what this does is it prevents the powerful torque that's going through this axle from going into the forks and cracking the dropouts. It transfers that load back to another bolt, and when you receive it, the axle nuts will be all the way down. We'll loosen them right off because it's going to make getting it onto the bike easier. And there are a set of washers. These washers want to be on the outside of the fork. So we'll move those out. So this is ready to go on, except we do have the torque arrest nut, or actually it's the torque arrest bolt and spacer. And we'll take that off before we go to put this in place because otherwise it'll get in our way, and then we'll put it back in place. There's a washer and a spacer involved here, so let's not lose those. There we go. So washer and a spacer. I'll hold on to those and I'll show you where they go in a moment. So that's our wheel ready to go on. I'll just lay that down here and lay our washer and spacer and bolt. However, before I put these on, it's going to be much easier to put the fender in place before I put the wheel in place. So, and you may notice as well, the disc brake is dismounted at this time. This also makes putting the wheel on in front much easier. And makes putting the fender on much easier. This is the front of the fender. This is the rear of the fender that hangs down. And we want our zip tie clamp part to be in the back. So flip these around. Okay, so we're ready to put this fender up into place. And to do this, we're going to slide the fender back through the fork. And I've got to thread these little zip ties through here. We're trying not to scrape up the fender too much on the fork here. And as you can see, the fender has some little notches in it that are meant to go up into the fork crown. I'm going to do up the zip ties. I'm not going to do them up super tight at this point because there will be some fine tuning of the fender placement to be done once the wheel is in place. Okay, and on this side, this is our motor power cable, and I'm going to capture it with my top zip tie on the motor drive side. Just because it holds it out of the way, and I'm not going to capture it with the bottom one. There we go. And as I said, I'm doing these zip ties up nice and loose so that we have some ability to adjust later. In putting the wheel on, we want the motor power cable to be coming out at the bottom, and we want the torque arrestor to be pointing back. This is basically the lineup that will allow it to slot down into the slots of the bicycle dropout. And as I said before, we've taken our torque arrestor bolt and spacer off before we go to put it in place because we need them out of the way. There's just enough room to ooch this wheel into place while the bike is on the center stand. I have to squeeze a little bit, but not too much. Okay. We are ready to tighten everything up. So I'm going to swing this axle into position. We want our 2 fork washers on the outside of the fork. And I'll have to give this a little lift. There we go. And in it goes. Nice and easy. The front wheel is much lighter than the back wheel, so it goes on quite nicely. Now, one thing though, before we do these nuts up, we want to make sure that the axle is seated properly up in the fork. So I'm holding this up while I tighten these nuts down by hand. And then I will firmly hold the wheel up in place while I tighten with my 15mm wrench. And at this point, I will then insert my spacer washer in between the torque arrestor and the torque arrestor retention plate and slide my bolt in, and I guess I lucked out because it all lined up. Sometimes you might need to loosen off this little bolt so you can adjust the angle of the plate so that it can capture the hole for the torque arrest. And this I'm going to do up very tight. And then I will make sure that the other bolt is also very tight. There's a little nut behind there. So that's got our axles done up. And now that this is all on, I'm going to give these a little extra crank. These want to be quite tight, but not outrageous, because most of the torque arrest is being done by the torque arrestor, but of course you don't want your wheel to fall off. I would say about 5 Newton meters. This is now all in place, and I can line up. There are arrows that I'm following to line up the power cable. Arrow, white arrow, and there's a little black arrow right there. There we go. So our power cable is lined up. Now, the only thing to do, well, there are 2 things to do. We're going to attach our front brake, and we're going to line up our wheel. So to attach the front brake, we'll undo these bolts. Straddle the rotor with the caliper. There's one bolt started, and the second bolt started. Okay, so we've got our disc brake caliper mounted, we've got our fender mounted, we've got our wheel mounted. And all we need to do now is just get everything lined up so it spins nice and freely. So first of all, I'm going to give another push up on this fender and make sure it's seated right up at the top of the fork. Then I'm going to give the wheel a spin, and we can adjust where the fender sits in relation to the wheel by basically just pushing it back and forth a little bit, and the zip ties, because they're not fully done up, will give us some leeway to adjust things. Okay, so the fender is good, and now our disc brake. The easiest way to adjust your disc brake is to have the bolts just loosened off so that the disc brake can move in and out. And we can hear a little bit of rubbing on the caliper, and that's fine. And then what we can do is give the front brake a squeeze, and that will center the caliper on the rotor. Give it a spin, and then another squeeze, and then with the brake squeezed, I will tighten up these bolts. And that should do a pretty good job of centering the caliper on the rotor. Okay, so I'm going to wiggle and coax. Now we've got a perfectly spinning wheel. We don't have any drag on the disc brake. We don't have any drag on the fender. I'm going to use my side cutters to reach in here. I'm not going to clamp too hard because I'm actually tightening this up. So I'm using the side cutter to pull the remaining slack out and then clip. And the same on this one. Pull the remaining slack out. Now you could also do this with a pair of pliers if you're concerned about accidentally cutting, but I have gentle hands so that I can do it. There we go. And once again, give the wheel a spin, make sure our fender's not rubbing. Now you can always make minor adjustments once you've tightened the zip ties up all the way, but it's good to get the major stuff done before you tighten them up. And I'm just rotating the side cutters to pull that slack out of the zip tie and then clipping. And by the way, of course, we want to be very careful not to cut our power wire with our side cutters. You'd have to make a pretty big mistake to do that, but hey, you never know. That's good, and clip. Okay, so that's it. That's our front wheel mounted. And just as a caution, when I've completed an operation like this, I like to go through and just double check the critical bolts. So double checking our axle nuts, making sure they're good and snug. Double check the torque arrest, make sure it's good and snug. And then double check the brake mount bolts and make sure they're nice and snug. There we go. So it's all good. Nice and tight, spinning freely, looking great. All I will need now is my Allen key to mount the seat and the tail box. We'll start out with the seat. The hardware is mounted onto the bottom, and we'll just peel that off. Try not to lose any of the bolts. We have 4 bolts and 4 washers and a plate that goes inside the seat. So here we go, 4 bolts, 4 washers, and our mounting plate. We're ready to put the seat on. Now, depending on your leg length, you will want to pick your mounting points. And I happen to know what my leg length is, and my mounting holes that I will be using will be the second one back from the front and the 4th back from the front. And these are the mounting holes that most people between the heights of about 5'7" and maybe about 5'10" are going to want to use these holes. Our pad comes off. Now, our plate goes down into our seat bottom with this arc cutout for the arc cutout of the seat, and then we'll place it onto the bike. And as I said, I'm going to use the 2nd set of holes back and the 4th set of holes back. Just hand tightening these for now. All of the hardware on the Electrom is stainless steel. And it's quite obvious why. This is an outdoor vehicle. We want to have non-rusting hardware. Sometimes a little bit of wiggling to get things to go. And then out comes our Allen key with our 5mm head. There's our 5mm head. For those of you in the United States, when I say mil, I mean millimeters. I imagine that's pretty obvious, but just want to make sure. Okay, and I'm tightening this up. And then for my 5'8.5" or 9 height, this is about the location I wanted. So I'm going to bring these down to snug, but not tight all the way. I'll put the seat on. and just give it a test. Sit back, and there we go. That's pretty good. Proper leg extension is when you're at the bottom of the pedal stroke, your knee is almost straight, but not in danger of locking back. That's about the right pedal extension. That feels really good. The handlebars feel like they're in the right place, so I'm happy with that. Take the seat pad off, and I'll tighten this down the rest of the way. Okay, now to put the tailbox on. Our tailbox hardware is here. I've pulled it out of the tailbox, and your tailbox hardware consists of 3 bolts. 2 are short, 1 is longer. The longer one is black, and it goes in the center hole of the tailbox. So we have 2 shorter stainless steel and 1 longer black oxide. Okay, our attachment points for our tailbox are here, same place on the other side, and on the back of the tailbox. There are 2 sets of attachment points. Most people will use the rear attachment point. So we've got a front and a rear, and a front and a rear. Most people, that being anyone over about 5'7" in height, is going to use these. For really short riders, then you might want to use the forward ones, but you'll have to do some modifications to make that work. Okay, now let's put our tailbox on. Double check that we're still recording. To mount our tailbox, we want to make sure our 2 cables are accessible. We have our battery extra power cable, and we have our signals cable that tells the lights and turn signals what's going on. Lift up the tailbox and place it onto the strut, just kind of back here. I'm going to take the seat off for now, or I'm going to take the hatch off for now, because it's just going to make life easier. Place this stuff down on the ground. So before I slide it forward, I want to do up my cables. So I'll do my signal cable, and it's got arrows and little slots, so it's very hard to get it wrong. And I will pass my power cable through the required holes. Now I'm going to lift up a little bit to bring it forward, and then slide it down into place, making sure I don't pinch any cables. Alignment is good when the front of the tailbox is flush with the front of the strut. Then I look down from above, and I can see that my rear hole is lined up. So I insert the black nut or bolt there. That's good. And I'm just finger tightening it for now because I need to be able to wiggle things around to get things lined up. And then insert into the holes in the tailbox. It never hurts to have a good sense of feel on these things. So I found the holes that these go into, and I'm finger tightening there. And we can wiggle a little bit to find the hole. There we go. Okay. Now I'm just going to view the tailbox from the rear and make sure it's nice and level, and it is. It really does want to sit level, but it never hurts to double check. And now I can tighten up my side bolts all the way. And then I tighten up the rear all the way, nice and tight. Okay, now I can put my tailbox hatch back on, and these are simply pin hinges that slide in from the side. And one thing to point out is that though this comes on and off very easily, it will not dismount when the tailbox is closed because there's an overlap. So when you close and lock the tailbox, you do have security. Somebody can't just slide it out at the front. And that's it. That is the assembly of your new Electrom. All you have to do now is take a bit of time and learn how to ride it, and you're off to the races. Thanks for watching.